And we're live. Another coaching slash CEO wisdom pod with Eric Goodman, Ph.D. I am Charles Cormier, your host, also CEO of podbuyer.com. If you want to start or scale a podcast, get insights, get good guests like Eric, exchange with them, connect with them, get subscribers, and even get clients. Eric, can you tell me a bit more about yourself?
Yeah, of course.
And a bit more about your company.
Yeah, thank you. So a few things about myself, just by way of background. I have been fascinated with high performance for decades and always wondered like what separates individuals that are high performance athletes and organizations. How do you create high performing teams and cultures? And so a lot of the work that I've done over the years is around creating strong organizational cultures, accelerating performance, creating a sustainable competitive advantage for organizations. So really considers myself a business strategist. And I come to this by way of being a recovering academic, I guess you could say. I got my Ph.D. in business administration, was a professor, spent over a decade as a business school dean, and then many years in the C-suite as a chief academic officer as well. And during that time, consulting with companies and doing custom executive programs. So a lot of what I do beyond the consulting work is training and executive coaching also to really help people optimize their performance and sometimes just discovering and leveraging their potential, things that they may not recognize within their company, so they can really focus on their strengths and use that to their advantage to create somewhat of a blue ocean in terms of the competitive landscape, where they can really capitalize that and grow quickly and scaling more efficiently.
Love it. You've been in touch with early talent students that are 18, 20-ish years old, 22. So you've probably asked yourself many times, genes vs environment question. What creates hyper performance? Is it the parents that taught their children how to behave in some certain way to face Y environment? How is performance created? What separates an athlete from a super athlete?
Sure. Wow, that's a great question. Well, I think in part when we look at the education system, there's a lot of things that haven't kept up with what we know about neuroscience and the way people learn, and in fact has the opposite effect, especially if it's high stakes testing. So that environment isn't always conducive to helping somebody become a high performer. It's both, and we know from epigenetics the impact that the environment also has as well, and the messaging. I'm a firm believer that, the impact that parents and educators have in encouraging their students to have a growth mindset versus a fixed mindset. If you've read the work by Carol Dweck on mindset, really important for all of us, not just students, but any adult, to understand that as individuals, we have the ability to grow and change. Our intelligence, our capability isn't fixed at birth. Even for those people that go on to become, high performing or Olympic athletes, there's a level of talent that may be innate, but when you put in more effort, you eventually develop some skills. And then when you put in more effort, that's when you really achieve. And that's when you look at work with persistence and resilience around grit. That's a really big piece of it. So it's helping people understand that there's no such thing as failure. It's only feedback. And unfortunately, our education system measures intelligence, typically verbal and mathematical. You're not recognizing all the other, 11 plus intelligence. If you look at the work by Howard Gardner, there's body, spatial, naturalistic, musical. And the list goes on. And I think it was Einstein who says, if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it's lived its whole life thinking it's stupid. And so unfortunately, there's people that if they're in that environment and don't recognize that they have gifts, that they can really accelerate through having the right mindset. It's the mindset, the skill set that will lead them to be able to get better, and recognizing that it's that 1% improvement daily and just refining and getting the feedback. And there's no such thing as failure as long as they're learning and growing. So.
It's interesting that Einstein said that. He probably quoted that with people that thought he was stupid because he had like zero business value, for example. But there's also the other side of that coin, which is that everyone pretty much agrees that Einstein was one of the most intelligent folks of our time because
Absolutely.
of general relativity, right? So he touched a bunch of concepts and regrouped them into one. And I think that's his genius. I think to be a high performer, you also need to be a generalist. You need to know a bunch of things. Yes, you need to be straight on your goals. What are my goals? Happiness, wealth, right? We live in capitalism, impact, and to
Yeah.
measure my intelligence based on that goal. My question for you, though, coming back to grit, which is one of my favorite topic, I think, yeah,
Uh-huh.
you definitely need to work long, hard, and smart. That's the equation right there if you want to be quote unquote successful in the business world and probably in the athlete world too. But my question is, how does one teach grit? Because in my book, it's like exposure, throwing that beloved person in the lake and see if they sink or swim, and
Sure.
also showing tough love, which is like, okay, yeah, you did this wrong. I do this for your good. Yet, like most people do not listen to tough love, like my parents and all of our parents, they
Yeah.
did the tough love things with us, and at some point you stop listening to them, you want to rebel. So how does one teach grit?
Well, the part of that is it's probably a combination too, going back to is it genetic or is it environmental in terms of what you're exposed to? And yeah, you're throwing somebody in the lake, swing, sink or swim or not. I think ultimately when you talk about grit, you can't talk about grit without talking about the idea of learning more broadly and mastery. And so when you look at the levels of learning going from unconscious incompetence, you don't know what you don't know, to being consciously aware that you're incompetent, that you actually have an awareness that there's something you don't know, and then moving to conscious competence where you're practicing and it's more mechanical and routine, and then getting to the point of unconscious competence where it just flows effortlessly. So you're in your zone. And I think back to like Bruce Lee, who said, I fear not the man who knows 1,000 different kicks and practiced them once, but the man who's practiced one kick 1,000 times. And I think when you look at the grit and the resilience, and it's approaching things with a mastery mindset. And Malcolm Gladwell talked about like the 10,000 hour rule or he popularized that. But that was really based on some work by Anders Ericsson, who looked at violinists at the Berlin Music Academy and said, okay, here's the average by the age of 20, the number of hours that they've spent. But it's not just 10,000 hours. And when you talk about grit, it's not just practicing. And even Vince Lombardi said, practice doesn't make perfect, but perfect practice makes perfect. So you've got to have a system where you've got people that have an intention, like a goal, like you said, I want to be the, number one, basketball star. Watched Air, the movie, a couple of times already. It's so many leadership and lessons about that, the mindset. But ultimately, do you have a goal? Is it deliberate? Are you intentional? Do you have the ability and a skill to work towards mastery with ideally a coach who's been there before, but that's providing feedback to you, because that's the only way you're going to course correct and get better at it. And that's an aspect when you look at grit, it's your talent. And you can look at the work by Angela Duckworth on grit, great book there as well. It's talent, and as you take whatever talent you have and you multiply it by effort, you eventually get skill. And when you take your skills and add even more effort to it, it's that resilience, that practicing over and over again until you get to mastery. That's where you get the levels of achievement that you see among high performers. And so there's a lot of different aspects to it. But ultimately, you can look at, kids like the Tiger Woods of the world, like who's raising them and what messages are they sending them and what types of practice do they have. And then also people that are older in life that start, you're never too young or too old to start learning something new. So I think, that's also that growth mindset versus thinking, oh, I'm born this way and that's all I'll ever have in terms of my capability. And so, but there's got to be a why. There really has to be a why in terms of your purpose. That's where grit is. It's like, what is in your heart, like your drive to, whether it's building a successful business and scaling and leveraging that. And I was just on a call earlier today with an individual, and they were talking about, their concern is being able to support their family as an entrepreneur and starting up a company and scaling. Are they going to be successful? And so much of that's mindset. And the other thing, you can go back to mindset, talking about high performers. I read a book by The Inner Game of Tennis decades ago by Timothy Galway that talks about, you got these two voices in your head, and we all do, right? And more recently, the idea of positive intelligence, in terms of what and how you're feeding your brain with your thoughts, because that influences your feelings, behaviors, actions, results, and so on. So a little longer answer, but I think that's really key. There's a lot of things.
It's a good one. Never seen anyone quote so many authors in one answer. So good job on that title. I need to read The Inner Game of Tennis. I've been a tennis player myself for a while, and it's almost a miracle that I haven't read that one, the bookworm that I am. So thank you for that reminder.
It's an old one. So
yeah, but apparently it's gold. And
It
I even without reading the book, I've read the summary, of course. I know what it is about the two voices, and what better game than tennis to signify that the importance of that, when it's 40-0, like how do you get back to a deuce and then win by advantage?
Exactly.
Such a beautiful sport. Golf is also incredibly complex.
Mhm.
Lots of practice, lots of discipline. I worked at the golf club for the first 4 to 5 years of my life and practiced almost every day. And today I can drive a ball straight, but how many times did I practice,
Sure.
Takes a full lifetime to master that. The 10K hours, yeah, interesting. Like, I think I did my 10K hours as a CEO, but then can we decorticate what are these skills as a CEO? Is it managing employees? Is it deep work? Is it product? Is it sales? So that's when it gets interesting. Should we segment like 10K hours as a salesperson and so forth?
Well, I think you got to look at, the idea of 10,000 hours, it's not the number of hours at the end of the day, it's the number of iterations. And actually, with a growth mindset, really, you want to fail faster and you want to learn. But as an entrepreneur, one of the things, or a business owner, is helping people, like, what are your gifts? What are your talents? And I wrote a LinkedIn newsletter about this recently. Like, what's your Michelangelo? What are you carving? You got to carve away a lot of stuff as an owner and a founder of a company that's irrelevant to creating your masterpiece. And that may be to be delegating and finding who's that can do other things for you that aren't your sweet spot. Because there's so many people that end up doing $10 an hour work, in essence, because they feel like they got to be the jack of all trades doing everything when they're starting up. And it's like, no, what's your gift? What's your zone of genius where you really need to go all in and focus only on that? So I think that's a mistake I often see, people make in business and in life. You got to focus on your strengths and minimize your weaknesses. I saw Peter Drucker, who's, regarded as a management guru before he passed, at a conference a couple of decades ago. And that was one of the things he said, if you can help people, is one thing, whether you're a leader or a manager or a founder, or even in relationships, you've got a significant other, like, maximize their strengths, minimize their weaknesses. And there's environments you can create that allow you to do that. And it's how you treat other people too.
Yeah, it's an interesting question, right? Because I was gifted with intellect. One of my granddad's a dentist, and with great cardio, whatever that means, endurance. Plus, it's somewhat interrelated to that, but energy. I'm quite intense. Was ADHD profile when I was young, so I take this core. And then I develop some skills on top of that. And that, I don't think these skills have to do with genes. Adaptability is my number one. I can be thrown in pretty much any situation, and I get my stress levels under management levels. I can forge a plan and I can execute on that plan. I have a question regarding this and the past point that you mentioned, which is goals. Often when I reflect to my student life, I'm somewhat disappointed in the lack of direction that I had and the lack of progress. Because if you don't have a direction, there's no progress, right? Yeah. It's pretty sensible. Why haven't I ever been conscious of the existence of goals at that age? I think I discovered goals at like 20 or 22. Why don't they teach us that at school? Because I never had goals before the age of 21, or 20.
I love such a great question. There are some school systems that are actually bringing other things into the curriculum with goals and mindfulness and well-being and looking at the whole person. But, unfortunately, it hasn't kept up. I mean, there's still a lot of politics and government and standard curriculum and the 3 Rs and things like that. But there is increasingly an awareness of the importance of that. And there are some universities, some of the schools I was at, we had success courses that got into other life skills, essential skills. And, it's just overlooked in terms of goals. The other areas that's overlooked, which is what I help with businesses, is selling and being able to dramatically increase their sales through using emotional intelligence and reverse engineered personality systems. So you can literally triple your conversions, but you're always selling something and influence. And that's probably one of the biggest skills, life skills, is like, how do you create and connect with other people? Because people do business with who they know, like, and trust. So, but where do we teach that? We don't teach communication skills effectively. And you see it in K-12 with bullying and people not getting along and just a lot of other issues, mental health wise as well. But it is something that really needs to be taught, and goals need to be directional. But I think having people really understand their unique gifts and thinking about and getting clear on that. And I actually offer pretty much monthly some challenge events to help people really get clear and move from maybe confusion and being crabby and not sure to certainty and clarity around like their life direction and how they can leverage their profession and their career towards whatever it is they want to do, their passion. And that needs to start in K-12, those discussions about that. But in most cases, they're not. There's some Montessori schools that do a really good job of doing that, but in general, it's overlooked.
Right. Because I mean, listening to that, the list kept on piling. So we started with grit. They should teach that at school. True sports, mostly, I believe, right? The sports, I mean, I had one physical activity class per week. Like, what the hell, especially with an ADHD kid, you want to burn the energy at the start of the day. Then I would add, mindfulness, which you touched on, sales, of course, but I think the greatest game changer out there was teach entrepreneurship, because even if they're going to get a job, which I think is going to change with AI, by the way, I think everyone's going to be employed and self-employed with AI. That's another one for another day. But products, build something that people want. What if we would teach them that from scratch, always be a value, and people will give you money for that. And then another funny one, which I often preach about in my long LinkedIn post, is relationships, because you're going to get in a relationship. That's somewhat of a default model, although younger generations, we're seeing the rate of polyamory, I believe it's called, go higher, which is interesting in itself. But relationships are very hard, but they're also very rewarding. So I believe that should be taught at school. And last one, but that one is also interesting, leadership. I didn't need classes of leadership because it was in my genes. When I was young, I was leading my little pack. But how about to teach you that you're going to be a leader? You might manage other folks. How do you lead them in the right direction? Oh, and I'm going to add one last one, promise. Ethics. They did have like something similar to that, I think, in my school. I believe it was like called morale in French, morale / like religion course. But how about ethics, and doing good, and what doing good means, and how to calculate that, and so forth? What do you think?
Yeah, I think this is a great list for starting. If we could have that.
I'm starting my own school, by the way.
Design your own curriculum, for schools, because ultimately, all those things, it starts with mindset. It helps people understanding that, and resilience and grit, and even the feedback process. So I led the nation's largest college, one of the nation's largest college of business, at least in competency-based education. I had over 20,000 students in the college. And one of the things with the competency-based education is you just haven't learned it yet. And so you're not getting an F, and you're not worthless because you got an F. I've seen and know students who've attempted suicide because they didn't get a good grade. And so that's not a resilient mindset, right? It's because they have a fixed mindset. And if they failed, then that means that they're not worthy, or they're not good, or they're broken. And so how that encourages that shifting, like with what you said, is really important. In my newsletters, confidence and leadership. So I love you mentioned leadership, and it starts with leading yourself. There's a lot of people, you've got to be able, whether you're a follower or a leader, you've got to understand leadership concepts. to do that, and then to become a leader of leaders and to really grow and scale, especially if you're going to be running a business, to do that effectively. But what does it mean? And there's so many competencies for leadership. And in fact, actually, if there's any educators out there watching, I've got a forthcoming book that'll launch right after Labor Day in the US. It's entitled From Teacher to Leader, to help teachers, whether they're in K-12 or faculty in higher ed, move into leadership roles, and how to become effective in that sort of educational leadership area. And the hope is, I mean, I think the other thing you've got to understand, one thing that you didn't have with leadership is change management and understanding change, because you've got to change yourself and understand how to do that and how to lead and influence others to move with you if you're going to really, influence people to buy your products, have your service. There's some change process that occurs, because if they're using somebody else in their business, maybe a different product or service, you've got to get them to change and to move and see the benefits of what you have to offer, right? Whether it's a product or service too.
A/B test or amplify also I would
Yeah.
use. So sometimes you don't need to box someone out, you can just be like, yeah, you can try us. That's one. And second, we might even amplify this other company that you're working with. For example, one of my agencies, we offered cold email as a service, right? But when we hit a certain size, a certain sales team size, I'm more of an enabler than I am a generator. I teach them how to use these tools so that instead of me being in my own silo and generating 5 meetings, they can each generate 5 meetings more. And at the end of the month, we get 25 more meetings. So that's a cool niche right there that you just talked about. Are you thinking of deploying one from academia to entrepreneurship as well, like teacher that want to start their own businesses?
I actually am. Yeah. So we should talk more about what that looks like, because and I also do work within healthcare. And so, in fact, I was on a similar discussion recently that was live, where we were talking with nurse entrepreneurs that are going into other, businesses that they're creating. There's a lot of people that are leaving both, healthcare as well as education for a lot of burnout and other things as well. So yeah, for
Huge
sure.
niche, especially since COVID, right? So it's like, yeah, again, I stamp of approval on the niche. I'm pretty much obsessed with product market fit. So yeah, go ahead. You'll be quite successful. I want to finish the pod with a bang. Although we didn't really get into specifically what you're doing. We can book a round two for that. But I want to ask you one question. So you heard me about the weird predictions that everyone will be self-employed. I wrote a LinkedIn post about that today. I believe that everyone will be sort of freelancer-ish in the next 5 to 10 years, because they're going to manage an army of AIs as employees, quote unquote. What do you think about that prediction? And do you think they should teach AI and even a form of how to manage an AI in the curriculum?
Oh, yeah. And there are schools that have already started doing that since late last year, some that actually have formal courses in that, and a lot of conversation around AI and, not just ChatGPT 0 and plagiarism and how do you detect stuff and what's student work, what's artificial. But really, I think one of the in-demand, we already see it, is prompt engineering. And, the jobs for that within companies and organizations, or whether you're a solopreneur or in an organization. I would say this. People have been talking about, since Drucker and the knowledge worker, when he first came out with that, it's shifting. It's not maybe as dramatic as 5 to 10 years that everybody's going to be like freelance and gig economy, but we're definitely seeing a shift. And I think COVID sort of put a stake in the ground around that, because people are just done. And, we've seen mass exodus. When you look at Gallup's, employee engagement is abysmal, and people want to be doing something more meaningful and fulfilling. And they recognize that, life is short. We're not promised anything. And I think even when you talk about those corporations, you think about the industrial age and the education system and the outgrowth with the military and everything else. It was a mass assembly line to be able to provide those workers, whether factory or white collar eventually, into those cogs in a wheel type of environment, which, is no longer what our education system needs. Like what you're saying with that course, where you need to teach entrepreneurship and leadership and other things. But that's sort of blasphemy for the corporation to say, well, wait, we need these people to come in and fill this, round slot in this round hole in our business to do these tasks. But if people start not doing that, that's going to disrupt a lot of, and it already is. You're seeing that with companies having really big challenges with their talent pipelines.
Fully agree. For those that don't know, by the way, prompt engineering is just literally writing a big block of great orders. So it's kind of taking your leadership skills, converting them into communication skills, and how to plug that with an AI to task it the right way, which is complex, believe it or not. I'm even hiring prompt engineers in my company. Second thing that I just want to last touch about, because it caught my attention and brought some sparks in my brain while listening to you, is that change happens fast, especially when done in like forward-thinking communities. A country and the education system, it's a behemoth. It moves very slow, and there's a lot of actors in there that are incentivized not to change stuff, But I do believe that the future is small communities that are very much on the left wing, the left side of things. They operate very quick. They use the latest technology. And I think these little communities will be able to make things move very fast and probably even revolutionize education. They might create this new curriculum, this new technology. Now, the whole industry might not move at this pace, but these little trendsetters, they're probably 50 years in the future and could potentially recreate a better curriculum. What do you think about that idea?
Yeah, I mean, it's always been like that. If you look at the work of Everett Rogers on the diffusion of innovation and adoption curve, you've got your early adopters, and it is those innovators that are pushing the edge. You see a lot of really cool things happening with ed tech. I worked with some high-end organizations doing some adaptive learning and simulations, and there's a lot going on with virtual reality as well. And I think when you look at those pockets of innovation, and some of them are becoming mainstream, even this idea of competency-based education was a proof of concept. And now, there's schools that have, 100,000 plus students that are doing these types of things where they've embedded that. And it's really, that's the other thing with the education system. It's often disconnected from somebody's meaning network in terms of what's relevant, what's important to them. And unless there's emotion, you're not going to get the learning taking place. And, the dendrites and the axons aren't firing in a way for it to go into long-term memory. It's cramming for an exam and things like that. So I think just even the whole process of learning and shifting that to really recognize how people learning in different learning styles, to your point about the importance of recess, right? Like, for me to learn, I need to be moving and not sit still in my chair, because I'm not going to learn that way. I'm kinesthetic learner or whatever. So yeah, I agree that, when we look at that, because when you look at those early adopters, eventually you got to cross that chasm to the early majority and get people and the masses, and you're going to have laggards, of course, but we will see it. I mean, it's starting to happen. And I think with the technology and particularly what's going on in ed tech, I'm hopeful, as it sounds like you are. We're aligned in many ways in terms of like where these things are going to start. And the proof will be in the results and the outcomes that you get through the educational process and the learning process. And do you have a more well-rounded individual that can actually be more effective and have a higher quality of life and contribute to society in a greater way when they do that? So big difference.
Hell yeah. Very inspired, very insightful. And one last thought that I had once listening to you, it's a funny one. It's like, I'm glad that Eric didn't had me in primary school or high school, because I was a little devil. College, I was a good student though, and university too. Really grateful for these years. Thank you so much, Eric. Where can people find out more about you?
Well, two things. First, let me share before I tell them how they can connect with me. One thing that I'd like to do for those that are tuned in or listening is give them a complimentary personality report that's designed to predict buying behavior in less than 90 seconds. So it's a game changer for entrepreneurs and any business looking to scale. And you can get that by going to crackmycode/communicate. And it'll take you 90 seconds. You're doing a very quick card sort, and you'll get a personality report back that will tell you some insights about your mindset and how best to communicate, because not everybody how you want to be sold to is not necessarily how others want to be sold to. And if we
Exactly.
approach people like the golden rule, treating others how we want to be treated, doesn't always happen. But besides that, so www.crackmycode.com/communicate. You can find me on LinkedIn. That's probably the best way of connecting, but also Eric at Meridian Success Group, all one word.com. You can email me there, and would love to connect and support people, because my goal is to really help people discover, leverage, and maximize their potential in their own lives or in their businesses.
Love it. And I'm Charles Cormier, your host. This has been the episode with Eric Goodman. You can also check me out at podbuyer.com if you want to start or scale your pod, get insights, great people like Eric, and even clients. Thank you so much, Eric.